Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Outside Carrow Road. I tend to record these inside the bowl of Carrow Road, but the gates have been locked, such is maybe the time constraint that I'm on. It is, I guess, nearly 6:30. That's an hour or so since the full-time whistle. So I've been forced to come outside and record outside Carrow Road. So hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully there's not too much distraction behind me. Always conscious of when you take a camera outside anyway, you get people who like to come jump in, say hello. So, hey, if anyone does, then that will add, I'm sure, to the broadcast rather than me waffling on and speaking nonsense. It has finished here. Norwich City have been beaten 2-1 by Middlesbrough at Carrow Road, a second successive home defeat to start the championship campaign. Probably more frustration as well for Liam Manning and his side. Largely for their own errors, really, have been cost this game. Really odd game, in truth. We'll obviously dissect and go through it, but ultimately another defeat, and that now means that obviously back-to-back home defeats against Millwall and Middlesbrough, which I think, given the atmosphere, given the optimism, both in general in terms of the season, the business that they've done in the window, but also at Carrow Road itself here today. And there were times, even when it went to 2-1, Carrow Road was really behind its team, really felt like something magical could happen. But even pre-game with the flags, with the atmosphere, it felt like the Norwich City fans kind of had done their bit. And the frustrating element was obviously what they then got on the pitch, which was another defeat. But it's probably the manner of it. And, Liam Manning, I felt, summed it up quite honestly, quite nicely after the game, where in many ways, and I've said this before on these, if you're walking away from a game and Norwich City have been completely outplayed and they've been, second best in a game, and they were second best today, I think, by and large, then you hold your hands up, no problem, beaten by a better team. The frustrating element is when it's that self-destruct and they're self-inflicted, and it's errors in possession and big chances and essentially giving away pretty routine concessions. And given we were stood at Fratton Park a week ago talking about how well they defended their box, how they'd rode out their luck a little bit, but had ultimately got a result across the line. Today is really frustrating, I think, in that lens and in every lens, just when you feel like they were beginning maybe to gel in that element of the game, and it just didn't quite happen for them today, I didn't think. So we'll dissect all of that. But Norwich City heading into the game, it was one change. That was fairly obvious, I think, with Marcelino Nunez out with injury. Jacob Wright came in. We'll come on to more of him later, and the way the game transpired. But it felt like an obvious change in the situation and the lack of maybe options available. Kenny McLean was fit enough to make the bench, which was a massive bonus. I think we saw when he came on late on the impact, the drive, the energy that he adds to this Norwich City team. I know there are a lot of critics out there, and I think maybe he showed today and has shown probably in these last two home games just what Norwich City lack when he's not in, and that drive and that energy and that ability maybe to go box to box, which I think their midfield two of Topic and Wright didn't quite have. And yeah, just a really odd first half, I think, is probably the best way to surmise it. First 10 to 15 minutes, I thought Norwich were really poor. Thought they got the spaces of their shape wrong. I thought they got their press wrong. They just didn't, and as a consequence of both of those things, looked a little bit ropey in possession, struggled to get up the pitch and to build anything really with any coherent sense of what they were trying to do. But for a minute, about 15 to 30, I thought they were really good. I thought they were the better team in the game. I thought they had more impetus about them, more energy. There were some lovely slick combinations that got them up the pitch. There was a really good sort of problem-solving element where they figured out they needed to step a little bit higher in terms of to meet Middlesbrough a little bit higher, and they had real joy with that in terms of picking up second balls, getting higher up the pitch, and beginning, I think, to maybe look a little bit like that Bristol City team that we saw last season, where they were playing the game in Middlesbrough's half. They were suffocating them at points with the way that they pressed and played, and they were going in packs and ones and twos and threes. And then when forcing Borough probably into errors where they were either trying to go longer, where they could mop up the second ball, and whatnot, or they could intercept and break it up, and that's what they did. Diallo was really influential in that period. Jack Stacey really influential in that period. The highlight probably was across him for Josh Sargent to meet with the header that came moments before the first goal. Just didn't make any solid contact in that. But Norwich created. Am I back? Hopefully I'm back. Apologies. Shout if you can't see or hear me. Hopefully you can. I disconnected from the Wi-Fi, so I think it picked a little bit of that up. I'm now on 5G, so hopefully it should be a little bit more reliable. Shout at me if that's the case. Hopefully you've been able to hear anything that I just said over the last 5 minutes. If not, it's all been rendered useless. But essentially, I was talking about the oddity of the first half and that first period compared to the mid period, where I thought Norwich did a lot of good stuff quite well. There were some good combinations. They got players into the game. Their wide players were causing problems. They had half opportunities, probably without really fashioning anything that we would just define as clear cut. So all of that was pretty good. And then the last half, probably from about minute 30 to minute 60, I thought Norwich were really poor in terms of the way they used the ball, in terms of the way that they gave up chances. I mean, you look at the goals they've conceded; they were horrible, both of them. The first, again, it comes from an error. They moved the ball left to right. I think Topic got caught in midfield. They moved the ball left to right, and Azaz, then with a slight deflection, it goes past Kovacevic, who, but again, they'd had warning signs a couple of times before. There was, Kovacevic gave the ball away and nearly got lobbed by Morris. There was one in the first 5 minutes or so where Kovacevic got actually caught playing in his penalty area and was robbed by Tommy Conway. So they've had warning points before that moment came, and actually it was that inability probably to read that to improve. And this is where I've sort of been with Norwich City over the first 3 games, where I understand Liam Manning and his coaching team have come in. They're trying to rectify a lot of what were issues at the back end of the pitch and defensively and whatnot. But I think a byproduct of that is Norwich just don't look as good in possession. They don't look as creative. That's one element for, barring the final 2-3 months of last season, they were really efficient at. They looked really dangerous going forward. They had some really good combinations that was excellent to watch at times. It was just the other end and defensively where the issues were. And it feels to me at the moment, and it's understandable because you try and turn the tap off at one end. I've said this a lot as well, and you can often turn it off at the other. But just feels to me like they're just lacking a bit of clarity and a bit of quality on the ball at points. And I think there's an inclination probably to blame the system. I don't necessarily feel it's a system issue. I think it's a structural connection-based issue at this moment in time. And hopefully with time and with more opportunity playing together, that will come. But I just felt in that first period where Norwich started the game, they didn't control the game with the ball. And for that period from about 30 to 60, they didn't control it with the ball either. And that is when Middlesbrough were able to grow into the game and looked quite comfortable, to be honest, in this contest. And we're essentially happy to sit in and wait for Norwich City to make an error on the ball. And they made plenty in the time. Morris with the lob, Conway early on, the 2 goals that they conceded. Hackney had an opening goal that he curled wide. They had a 1v1 just before Josh Sargent's goal. They fashioned enough opportunities largely through Norwich losing possession and through their own mistakes. And that to me just came from, playing in the right areas, playing in the right way, probably not scanning properly when they're taking the ball. It's basics in possession really that they're lacking. I think also, again, because of what they're trying to do, they can get caught transitionally between the free and the sort of free and wing backs, the 4 and the 3 wing backs at points, and that becomes then quite difficult to make up ground and to try and contract that shape back in again. So all of that I felt just contributed to 2 really sloppy goals. The first one is Az has so much time and space to get a shot away. The second, Medic, you watch it back, he gets drawn to a man who's on the edge of the box. He steps out. He's got to follow Conway, and if the ball goes sort of to the edge of the penalty area, it's a problem. But you have then bodies there to block it. He actually steps out. It allows Conway just to tap him. But again, they got behind. They got behind Norwich too routinely and too easily, and that is the major frustration. Because prior to those 2 goals, Norwich were in the game. They were probably edging the game. I would say they certainly, through the elements of their press, had the better of it. And then they just threw it away and they pressed that self-destruct button that we kind of seen last season. And that's the frustration for me, because it almost feels like they've lost some of those possession elements that were quite strong last season. And hopefully that's now something that they can build in with time. And it's still early, it's still 3 games, but I think a trend over all of them is me coming away probably feeling, and it's true of the last 15, 20 minutes at Pompey, it's true certainly of Millwall, I just wanted to see a little bit more on the ball. And I think there's again structural issues. I don't think the 210 Cianats and Marcondes gave Sargent enough, and that is often relating or translating and conspiring into Norwich just fizzing long balls into Josh Sargent, be it his head, his chest, his thigh, his foot, and just asking him to try and control them and almost get them up the pitch as a single entity. And that's so difficult for any player, let alone somebody who's as good as Josh Sargent. But ultimately, that central area just didn't function, I felt, in today's game. And the issue with Wright and Topic, I think, is a pairing, and we saw it. And again, I think we have to be a bit cautious with Jacob Wright because he's played 12 games of senior football. He did look really good at spells last season, but he was in a team that played in a way that he wanted to in terms of taking the ball in deep areas and trying to build up that way. This is a different team. It requires a different skill set, I think, from those midfielders, particularly when you're going with a two, and often not quite the case today, but certainly in games they will play. You need to be able to cover ground, both front and back, but also sideways. Topic does that. I think side to side, he covers the ground excellently. And I think we saw it last week when they had Nunez in with his energy, with his ability to get between the boxes and just be around all phases of play. That is almost an ingredient that you need from your midfielders, and particularly when the 10s maybe aren't giving you that energy and aren't making that a 4 in midfield, it can become quite difficult. And I felt at times they got the spacings wrong, they got the distances wrong, they probably just didn't quite offer enough support to Norwich's front really, and that led to the issues in possession that we saw. And then equally the 10s didn't drop deep enough for the two opportunities, the goals that they conceded, and that made the spaces so grand. So all of that coupled really with the structural issues probably was their downfall today, I felt. And again, that's frustrating, but I think it's probably more a selection issue than a formation issue as well. And yeah, that's frustrating. I think ultimately I've used that word a lot today, and it sums up how I feel. Second half, again, I thought Norwich could have scored inside the opening 5-10 minutes. Ian actually did really well to weave his way through a couple of challenges. Just saw the shot block, probably didn't get that away quick enough. Then obviously the incident in the second half with Jack Stacey and Silvera, where there's a clash of heads. It looked really nasty. We saw Jack Stacey leave the pitch in an oxygen mask with his arm held up, really shaky, not what you want to see at all. And obviously wish Jack Stacey well. I felt he played quite well today actually in terms of, and I know there's a lot of focus on his end product, and I get that, but I think the energy he provides, you could see when he went off, it wasn't quite the same for Norwich City on that right-hand side. He's a road runner. He gives you that constant energy, and at times that means from an attacking and defensive perspective, I think he can be caught lacking, but just that intent and energy and outlet is so important in a wing-back system, I think, to the way that Norwich want to play, and they had to slightly tweak. And obviously, from there, the afternoon is made harder by Jacob Wright and the decision to make that tackle, which, you know, I've seen it. It's a clear red card for me. When you go in with the studs and the height on that, it becomes very difficult to make a case as to why that's not a red card. Just one of those where he's taken a heavy touch and just desperately lunged and got it all wrong. But it made life more difficult for Norwich. I actually felt as a 10, they did things as well as they could have done. I would have liked to have seen a bit more proactivity, I must be honest, in terms of probably at half-time. I think there was a scope to change that back three and maybe go to a more conventional 4 and maybe stretch Middlesbrough a little bit more and get at their width, because, again, they were playing a 3 at the back. That seemed to be, certainly that central area became quite condensed when Norwich had the ball. If they could have stretched it wide, I think there would have been opportunities for them to create overloads in those areas. They didn't do that, but certainly once the red card was made, I didn't really see the value of having 3 centre-backs. I think they needed to push another man into midfield. And actually, the Chris Gordon sub, I think he could have come on with Kenny McLean just to add a little bit of fresh impetus and whatnot. Clearly, that didn't happen. And Norwich waited a little bit longer. I can understand the reason for doing that, just in terms of consolidating and trying to feel your way back into a game. But I'd just like to have seen Norwich and Liam Manning be a little bit braver in terms of going after the game at that point. They didn't, and again, that's the frustration. And yeah, just leave tonight, I think, feeling that this is a game where Norwich City have beaten themselves, and ultimately, if you're going to make the mistakes that they made in terms of in their own third against the quality of attacking players that Middlesbrough have, you're going to get punished, and they did. They got badly punished within that. I think there were positives in the game for Norwich. I recognise that maybe won't be the most popular view, but I felt this was certainly more positive than probably that opening day defeat to Millwall, because I thought the spell they had was more sustained. I do think those 10s that nobody yet has really grasped those positions. I think Antti Sienats now, after 3 games, is probably going to find it difficult to retain his place for Blackburn, I think, just on his offerings. And that's not to highlight him. I thought Marcondes as well just struggled to take that opportunity today. It feels like, again, at the moment, they're kind of putting square pegs into round holes in those positions, and that has probably come at a cost of their creativity in open play, really. It's wide areas and crosses predominantly, and set pieces where they're looking to make them pay. They need to be a little bit more creative, I think, in terms of the way that they want to play and break teams down, but especially at Carrow Road. And, you know, it's not about systems and formations for me. It's about intent. It's about the way you play them. And I just think at the moment they just haven't quite got that understanding of what they want to do. And also for Cianats, I think this is worth a point as well, in that that's a difficult position to grasp. It's different to the ones he played last season. I'm going to use the word again, but there will need to be a little bit of time with it. But again, I'm just not sure they're supporting Josh Sargent in the best way at the moment. And that feels increasingly like an area that they need to solve. So, yeah, look, some good bits, some bad bits. Ultimately, a defeat. I think it's important, particularly in this league. If we were up here against Portsmouth last weekend, we're kind of here. I think you need to kind of stay constant. And yeah, my feelings towards Norwich really are the same. I think there's a need to improve on the ball. I think structurally there's some work to be done in the middle of that pitch. And Jacob Wright now coming out, and what I will say is I think Kenny McLean added that energy, added that box-to-box element, but of course with his fitness, he's going to have to be managed cautiously. There's a game on Tuesday night as well. It's going to be interesting to see how and who they turn to solve that. Maybe Liam Gibbs comes into the conversation, because I think he is capable of providing maybe a little bit more energy. But of course they have to manage him as well. So yeah, look, some good bits, some bad bits. Still early. Everything still needs time to gel and to come together. But I think frustration will be that they've had 2 games at Carrow Road and lost both of them in a manner that was probably more reflective of themselves. I think they could have got draws out of both of these games quite easily, and both of those would have been reflective of how the game transpired. But ultimately, if you're going to make the mistakes that Norwich made, particularly against a side as good as Middlesbrough, they always come to Carrow Road. They're always a good test. They're always good value. They always have good attacking players. I mean, a front four of Morris, Hackney, Whittaker, Azaz, Conway, front five, is going to cause problems to any team in this league. And you saw what they did to Millwall last weekend. So they're a good side at this level. But again, I think the frustration will be that Norwich City were not outplayed or outclassed here. It was 2 teams that in many ways are trying to do similar things, similar formations. I thought for a lot of the game they cancelled each other out. But just in those defining moments, in those areas that they could control, they just weren't quite good enough today. And that is ultimately where they've lost this game. Pinkin.com, the place to go. We've got reaction from Liam Manning and Rob Edwards, and the fans already up. We'll have Harry Darling later. We're off to a recorded podcast to reflect on it in a more reflective way. I guess reflect in a more reflective way, if you can do that, and in a more considered way, and in a more long form way as well. So look out for that as well later tonight and tomorrow morning. Thank you very much for watching. Apologies for the Wi-Fi issues. It's thrown me a little bit being outside Carrow Road, but hey ho, that's the way it goes. And like Norwich City, we're going to have to be adaptable. And actually, if Liam Manning is adaptable, it's going to be really interesting to see what he goes with against Blackburn, because it feels to me like a change of shape, or certainly a tweaking of how they play the shape. Maybe dropping another midfielder in to create more of a 5-3-2, maybe feels like the way they go from here. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again on Tuesday night for the another game here, the League Cup visit of Southampton. See you then.